Knock on the Saints door. Quarterback sneak by Tom Brady to the 43-year-old score. He did. Touchdown, Tampa Bay. Now spiked that ball, Tom Brady. Who says I'm 43? He runs right up the gut and scores 6. 7. Handoff, run the ball. Fournette slashes away to the 40, to the 35, to the 30, to the 30, 25, to the 20. Fournette to the 10, 5, 3, 2, 1. Touchdown, Tampa Bay. Run the ball, Leonard Fournette. Wow, what a blast up the gut, found daylight, and outran everybody. Fire the cannons, get them going. Bucs win. Bucs win, Bucs win. Fire them cannons.
Well, and welcome to another episode of the Swords Up Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about our Week 5 matchup, Thursday Night Football, the first of the year on Fox versus the Chicago Bears. And obviously in the previews, like I always do, I'm going to be talking about key stats and players to this game and then giving a prediction at the end of the video. Starting off, like I always do, with the injury report. Not looking great this week, to be honest. Let's look at the key ones. Chris Godwin out for the second week in a row. He's going to be missing this game with a hamstring injury that he suffered back in Week 3 against the Broncos, and it wasn't looking good for him this week. He did not participate in practice at all, so he's going to be out for this game. LaShawn McCoy, who left the game last week with an ankle injury, is going to be out of this game as well, and Justin Watson, who was able to play last week but was out in Week 3, is going to be out for this week's game. So we're already down 2 wide receivers, and we might be down 2 running backs as well. With Leonard Fournette dealing with the ankle injury that caused him to miss last week's game, he is doubtful with that ankle injury that he suffered in practice before the Week 4 game against the Chargers. So obviously there's still a chance that he plays, but with him being given a doubtful designation and not participating in practice, it doesn't look like he's going to be able to go. And looking furthermore, Mike Evans also did not participate in practice this week with that ankle injury that he suffered in last week's game against the Chargers during the first quarter. He's going to be questionable going into this game, as well as Scotty Miller, who was a limited participant in practice today. He has hip and groin injuries, which also gave him a questionable designation for last week's game. He was able to go last week, but we'll see if he can this week. I'm expecting he plays. Mike Evans could be 50-50, but Fournette being doubtful, I think he's going to be out along with, like I said earlier, Justin Watson, LaShawn McCoy, and Chris Godwin. So no really major injuries on the defensive side for us, but on the offensive side, we are going to be missing quite a few important pieces. Looking at the Bears, their only real key injuries are going to be to wide receiver Darnell Mooney, who's questionable with a shoulder injury. He fully participated in practice today, so he should be able to go. He's relatively unknown, but he is their third receiver, so he's been pretty important to this team through the first few weeks of the season. So that's good for him that he looks like he's going to be able to go this week. But yeah, their only players that should be out with injuries this week are Deion Bush, who's already confirmed is out with a hamstring, as well as Sherrick McManus, who is doubtful with a hamstring. Those are both backup safeties. So now moving into the part where I would usually talk about the stats and the key players from the other team. Well, this week I want to do something a little different, and I'm going to give my thoughts on the Nick Foles versus Mitch Trubisky debate. And also that just leads me to saying, with Nick Foles starting this week, I'll be highlighting him as the key player for this week. But yeah, just talking about the Foles versus Trubisky kind of situation. So Nick Foles, obviously, he's going to be starting this week. And going back, starting with the beginning of the season, we're going to be rewind to that. So Mitch Trubisky started the season as the Bears starting quarterback, played the first game against the Lions, wasn't so great, and then threw 3 touchdown passes in a comeback win in the fourth quarter. So all three of those touchdown passes in the fourth quarter to lead the Bears to a comeback win. Then in week 2 against the Giants, Trubisky picks up his form from where he left off in the fourth quarter of the Lions game, and he starts out the first half of that game really well. But then in the second half, he's a bit off, and the Giants kind of come back into the game a bit, but the Bears are able to hold out and win. So they're 2-0 at this point. Then they go into week 3 against the Atlanta Falcons, who come into this game 0-2. And Trubisky, he's not great, but he doesn't play that badly. And I was watching that game live, and Trubisky ended up getting benched in the middle of the third quarter when they were down 26-10. Nick Foles comes in, and he leads the Bears to a comeback win in that game. And obviously, on the side note, it was the second week in a row in which the Falcons have blown 15-plus point fourth quarter leads 2 weeks in a row, and they became the first team in NFL history to do so just in a season. And they did it 2 weeks in a row. Because of the performance that Nick Foles put up in week 3, he's named the starter in week 4 against the Indianapolis Colts. And the Bears lose their first game of the season last week against the Colts. And the game was really low scoring. Bears were ineffective on offense. Couldn't really get anything going until the end of the game. So now it sparks the debate. Is there a difference in the offense between if Foles plays and Trubisky plays? Now, with Trubisky, he's been given so many opportunities, like through the course of these 2 years, that he has been kind of the full-time starter. And obviously, many Bears fans are going to be like really upset about how he has turned out because they drafted him so high. They drafted him with the number 2 overall pick, and they traded up to get him. In the same draft, which was the 2017 draft, obviously, in which, 2 other really good quarterbacks were taken in that draft, Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes. And you see how Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson's careers have ended up, and then you look at Mitch Trubisky's. And obviously there's reason for frustration with that, but you can't really blame the Bears for wanting to select him. Obviously they made a mistake, but they thought he had a lot of upside. And I think the major red flag was that I don't think he even played like a full season of college football. I think he only had like 9 starts or something at North Carolina, 9 or 10 starts, something like that. Obviously he was inexperienced even at the college level, but they thought he had the talent it took to, step up to the next level. And obviously, so far, it has not shown anything. So the first year that Trubisky's in the league as a rookie, he doesn't start the season out right away. Mike Glennon plays like the first few weeks, and then Trubisky comes in. And when Trubisky comes in, it's nothing special, but the Bears are 5-11, and they decide to keep him as the full-time starter. And then the next year, albeit, people can admit that they were carried by their defense, but Trubisky looked promising, and they went 12-4, won the division, and unfortunately went out in the wild card round and got upset by the Eagles, which was the double doink game that happened. But people look at Trubisky from that game and they say, oh, he has a lot of upside. But then last season comes and he regresses. The Bears go 8-8, and there's a lot of questions with Trubisky. People are wondering, is this the guy that we put all of our faith and trust into? We expect a lot more out of him. And to be fair, that's also not really all on him. It's also down to his management by the coaches and also the play calling. Maybe they're just calling plays that are just not suited for him. Now, obviously, you would expect Trubisky to execute those plays better as a head coach or an offensive coordinator, whoever's calling the plays. You would want to go over the plays with your quarterback and see what they feel most comfortable with and what they may need a little more work on and what they just don't like at all because it doesn't fit them as a player. And, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes with the Bears, but maybe none of that was really taking place and there just wasn't enough good communication between head coach Matt Nagy and Mr. Trubisky, but who knows. But now they got a new offensive coordinator in this year, Bill Lazor, and he was the one that made the decision to pull Trubisky for Foles in the middle of the Bears game against the Falcons. And so then when Foles comes in and delivers this insane comeback performance like he has been known for doing on the Eagles, obviously stepping in and being the savior as the backup quarterback who's thrust into the role of being the backup that's expected to go out and win the game, Nick Foles might be just one of the best to ever do that. When was the last time we saw a backup like Nick Foles be able to enter the game and just light it up? So obviously when the Bears coaches and higher personnel saw that, it really gave the impression that, maybe Nick Foles is the right guy for our offense. Obviously, because of their questions they had with Trubisky, they traded for him from the Jacksonville Jaguars after he just signed there as a free agent, only lasting 1 season, and he signed a pretty huge contract. I believe that he signed like an $88 million deal over like 4 years, so they gave him an insane amount of money, considering that he has only really been known in his best moments for being this backup that just comes out and is expected to win the game, and he has been able to do that, but he's never been a consistent starter in this league when given the opportunity, other than like one outlier season, which was the first season that he kind of really started at quarterback, and he didn't even play the whole season. That was that 20 touchdown, 2 interception season back in 2013. Other than that, he's not been a successful starting quarterback, whether it's been on the Rams or the Jaguars. So just looking at what Nick Foles has done and what Mitch Trubisky has done, are both the future of the starting quarterback position for the Chicago Bears? No, absolutely not. Trubisky's been giving multiple opportunities to prove himself, and while it's not all his fault, and while you may want to place some of the blame on the mismanagement of him by the coaching staff, he's still really shown that he has not turned out to be the player that the Bears expected him to be. While Nick Foles, on the other hand, yes, he can come in and be a great situational QB, but is he really that full-time starter that you're looking for? Not really sure. And also, I don't want to bet on him to be the future of your team, considering that he is in his 30s now. So honestly, I think the best resolution to this plan is, we'll see how Foles does these few weeks. And honestly, I would want to give Trubisky another shot before the season ends. I really think you should. If he plays well, then so be it. But I honestly think you get rid of both of these guys. Honestly, I think you might want to consider trading Foles away, get whatever you can get from him. Trubisky will be a free agent after the season. I think the Bears declined his fifth-year option, so he'll be gone. And if the Bears choose not to re-sign him, then so be it. He'll probably go sign and be a backup elsewhere. But I think you could keep around Foles as a backup if you choose not to trade him, because obviously, like I mentioned, he's an excellent situational QB, and he could come in, obviously, if the starter gets injured or pulled, and he could be a good piece to your team in that sense. Now, with Nick Foles being the starting quarterback, I am going to be highlighting him as the key player this week. So obviously in last week's game against the Colts, like I mentioned, it was not really a great performance from him. Pretty ineffective as a whole from the Bears offense. But just looking at his stats from the game, he had 26 completions on 42 attempts for 249 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. So yeah, nothing really great from him. And I think really the key to him this week, obviously last week, maybe we'll look at it and say, it's just going to be an outlier for the season. He went up against a pretty talented and emerging Colts defense. We'll see how he does, maybe against other teams. But I think it's going to be another test for him this week, coming up against another talented and emerging defense like the Buccaneers. And just seeing it from a standpoint of this just an outlier performance, I really don't think that is the case. Just looking at his career history and what he's been able to do as a starter, he hasn't been able to put up any consistent performances or stats whatsoever. I mean, he certainly has the pieces on the offensive side of the ball. His main targets really through this game and a half that he has played with the Bears has been Allen Robinson, Darnell Mooney, and tight end Jimmy Graham. And with Mooney dealing with an injury going into this game, Allen Robinson is the clear-cut number one receiver for the Bears in this game. And Allen Robinson is a pretty underrated receiver. I think he's been really great, and he's really revived his career since he did join the Bears in 2018. But yeah, the Bears offense does have some decent pieces. They have a great number one receiver in Allen Robinson. They have a solid running back in David Montgomery. Anthony Miller maybe hasn't done as much as people would have expected. And also from other guys that haven't been really able to produce much, like Ted Ginn and Jimmy Graham, who are into their 30s and well past their primes. But honestly, at the end of the day, I think it just comes down to Nick Foles just at least providing competent quarterback play and being somewhat efficient. He doesn't have to light the world on fire like he did in Super Bowl 52 in that heroic performance, because the Bears have the defensive talent that it takes to have their unit take over games and win football games for this team. Now, if Nick Foles at least just is somewhat effective, they'll be in pretty much every game that they play. Now, finally moving on to the Buccaneer side of things, I was considering highlighting, one of the tight ends in Rob Gronkowski or Cameron Brate as a key player for this game, with O.J. Howard obviously being out for the year. But I'm going to be highlighting this week Keyshawn Vaughn with the absence of LaShawn McCoy and possibly Leonard Fournette. I think we could see him have a pretty big role in this game alongside Ronald Jones. Last week he had his first touchdown as an NFL player. Other stat lines weren't too impressive. He had 3 carries for 4 yards and 2 receptions for 22 yards. One of those receptions was for a touchdown. And I think he's got a really bright future. Obviously, that's why we drafted him in the 3rd round, to be kind of the future of our running back room. And I think it's great to see how he's been thrusted kind of into this role now as our number 2 running back with Fournette and LaShawn McCoy being out. Yeah, I think it's going to give Keyshawn Vaughn really a chance to see what he's got. And he showed some flashes last week against the Chargers, but I think this week he's going to give you a little more of his potential and what he brings to the table this week. So yeah, looking at the prediction for this game, like I said, all the Bears really need to be in this game, and in pretty much every game that they play, is to have competent quarterback play. If they can have that, their defense will be able to keep them in this game. Now, just looking at the Buccaneers side, the offense is just way more explosive than the Bears. Obviously, you got way more pieces on that side of the ball. Now, there are quite a bit of injuries with our offense this week, so maybe that'll limit the offensive production. And I think the deciding factor is going to be the talent level of Tom Brady, and it's going to show over Nick Foles this week. They both obviously are experienced quarterbacks, and they don't really make a lot of mistakes, but I think Tom Brady's going to really show this week what he has left and prove that last week wasn't really a fluke at all. So while I predict that to happen, I still think it's relatively going to be a low-scoring game just because the Bears' offense showed last week against the Colts how ineffective they were, and because the Buccaneers have quite a bit of missing pieces on their offense this week. So I think this will be kind of more of a defensive-oriented battle, but I'll go with a final score in this one of 24-13 with the Buccaneers winning in this one. So yeah, that is going to be it for this week's prediction. Let me know what you think about this game in the comments below. I'm excited to see the Buccaneers play their first of 5 primetime games this year, and this will be their one and only Thursday night football game. So yeah, I'll be looking forward to watching this game. Hope you guys do enjoy Week 5's games, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching, and go Bucs.